All right. Remote work has enabled many technology professionals to work from anywhere, but building a career involves more than a Wi Fi connection and a laptop. On today's episode of The Modern Job Hunt, we'll discuss how to develop a promising career from a non tech hub. Today I have an outstanding panel from different parts of the region. I'll start out with John. John's QR code's up there. I am going to show their QR codes if you want to learn more about the guests today. John brings over a decade of experience in offering capital and strategic counsel to startups at both early and growth stages with a deep passion for driving innovation and entrepreneurship within the tech sector. As the former VP of product at Boast, he led the implementation of their platform, assisting businesses in identifying, claiming, and financing R&D tax credits and government incentives. Next, we have Kevin. Kevin is an outcome-driven product leader with a track record of building high-performance product teams in the B2B SaaS space. When not in the office, he's exploring the outdoors, writing music, or diving into the world of games. And last but not least, we have Josh. Josh is located in Whitehorse, Yukon. He is a partner at Outfront, a business development company that offers business coaching, entrepreneurial program design, and business development support services. He's lived across many cities across British Columbia's northern and southern interior, and currently works with a diverse cohort of entrepreneurs across several industries through the challenges of owning and operating businesses in remote and rural Canada. So, welcome, John, Kevin, and Josh. Right.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
So, we're going to start out with kind of some deeper dives into your stories about working in smaller cities, non-tech hubs, and the transition. I'll start out with the probably most rural or remote of everyone. So going to Josh up in the Yukon in Canada's northern area. Tell us a bit about your story and how you make the kind of remote and small town life work for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I grew up in Prince George, BC. So I was in the heart of BC's interior, and at that time, I thought that was small town. It was population 80,000. That was my definition of small. And when I finished high school, I thought I knew what I wanted to do right away. Maybe like most of us, as eager 19, 20-year-olds. So I went to Japan and I taught English for about a year. Realized that even though there was many challenges in accomplishing that without a degree, it was still that was too easy. So that couldn't be what I wanted to accomplish if I was just going to be checking the clock every day. So came back to Prince George, went to school, ended up working for a bank. I was a branch manager for about 10 years and moved all around the province, which definitely redefined small town for me. And then it was about 2017, I started having some, I guess you'd say, both physical and mental health challenges because of the career path that I was on. So I started looking at alternatives and really reevaluating what I was doing with my life. I had a friend up here from university from the small village of Teslin, and they were exploring opportunities in the upcoming cannabis space. So that was like kind of the big indicator for me. I'm like, okay, well, there's an opportunity to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial. And then I also had an opportunity in Calgary that I was looking at. So I was actually debating big town, small town, and when I was departing the bank. And I chose small town, I think primarily because of and maybe this sounds a little too simple, but the ease of opportunity. We have very few, I guess you'd say, triggers of competition in the territory. A lot of what happens up here is imported. And there's a large propensity to support local. And as a result, we see a lot of startups pop up, a lot of mom and pop shops that are able to make a good enough living based on the local economy. And so yeah, I saw that as an opportunity, not a lot of competition, allows me to go in, do something different, get into this ecosystem. And then it kind of all started to just grow from there. So my family and I have been up here for about 6 years now. I started this company with a fellow banker, friend of mine in 2020. And yeah, we've been working with businesses, for the last 5 years, helping them grow and scale outside of the territory and helping them, accomplish, I would say, really financial sustainability, which is a big thing up here, is having a market that's large enough to actually keep the doors open on your small business. So it's a very interesting um, environment, similar to where some of you guys are. There's a lot of bureaucracy. We're in a capital city up here. We have different challenges that come into play, and there's the bureaucracy comes from many different levels: federal, provincial, federal, territorial, municipal, and then we also have very strong First Nation governance up here with 14 First Nations, many of which are self-governing. So a lot of different triggers, and I would say, I guess, steps to walk through as you grow and expand your business and you grow and expand your network in a place like the Yukon.
Great. Well, we'll go to John next. And go ahead, John.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to give a bit of a context, actually, I was born and raised in Istanbul, which is the complete opposite of a rural remote setting. I believe the population now is close to 20 million, and moved to Canada in 2002, and lived in Vancouver, Seattle, Victoria, Nanaimo. And about 2 years ago, my wife and we were looking at different options that were available to us in terms of getting a bit of a bigger space after spending most of our lives in condos, and looking at what is available. And if you are familiar with Vancouver, you have the Fraser Valley, you have Squamish, Whistler, and you have Sunshine Coast, which is a small ferry away. And we have decided to move here just over 2 years ago, and it's definitely been interesting. If I were to take the earliest ferry, I'm in downtown Vancouver in about an hour, 20 minutes. But there are definitely times that it feels very rural and remote in here. One of the key decisions for me was the availability of fiber optic cable, which may sound funny, but really having that as a utility, which, I mean, in this day and age, it's just like electricity and water. And with fiber optic, which is a fun fact, even if you don't have electricity, you can still use the internet as long as your modem is being charged by a solar charger or something like that. So you are ultimately connected at any time, which was a bit of a decision factor, because what that meant is a structural foundation for these communities. And I believe TELUS has experimented their rural internet connection in Sunshine Coast for the first time before deploying their fiber optic cable in other parts of BC, which meant that, I mean, this was a bit of a more future vision for this community. As you have this connectivity, other type of businesses, more people are open to moving here, which was going to create its own economy. So that was a bit of a very small factor in a decision, but I think it was a very foundational one. And and then we have moved here, and we have been going through a few career changes, but it is a very open community. And there is definitely, after global pandemic, there has been quite a few people that have moved to these remote communities as well. And as networking events coming back up, you get to meet with all of them and understand everyone's story, which we can kind of dive deep later in the session.
Yeah, and then Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I grew up in really small towns in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia on the East Coast. A few of them had under 1,000 people. Moved to Victoria in 1999 to go to the University of Victoria. So that's where I graduated. I actually got my first product job in Victoria at a small engineering company called IVL, mostly focused on hardware, not software. I really wanted to get into sort of tech in the software space. So I moved to Vancouver in 2010. Ended up landing with a software company called ACL at the time. They later rebranded to Galvanize. And I was there for 12 years. That's where I predominantly built my product management career, I'd say. And I actually moved back to Victoria in about 5 years ago while I was still with Galvanize. So I was very used to being in the office, went remote before COVID happened. So that was really interesting, sort of being one of the only people that was remote while everyone was in the office. I think COVID and the pandemic really sort of changed that dynamic, because then everyone went remote. And I think my remote work got a lot easier at that point. Galvanize ended up being acquired by a company called Diligent, and sort of took the opportunity to look for my next step. Did my own startup thing for about a year that didn't quite work out. And I recently landed about a year and a half, 2 years ago with a company called User Testing. They're based out of San Francisco. We have offices in Atlanta, Edinburgh. I'm actually in Edinburgh right now, as well as Barcelona. And a lot of our leadership and executive team is actually works remotely. And I've hired quite a few remote people since joining. So really interested in the topic today, and yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And similar to John, I was at TELUS when I moved actually to Victoria, and I was punching in addresses when we were moving to figure out if they had fiber connectivity or not. And ironically, their strategy was rural to urban. So the rural communities actually got the fiber connection before the urban communities because the competition and the first mover advantage was greater in rural communities. So if people are thinking about moving, it's super easy to check what the internet connectivity is in that space, which is something critical when we're in this sector. So yeah, as we kind of transition, I think what I wanted to do was show everyone how people had transitioned to where they are today. We're going to jump into the first topic, which is kind of early versus late career small towns. And so all of us have either lived in Vancouver or big cities. I've lived in Nairobi, and now I'm in Victoria. But like, could I have done this from Victoria or a smaller town the whole way through? So yeah, I'll kind of, last time we started with Josh. This time let's go with John to kick us off, and then we'll kind of have that discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is an interesting one. I mean, when I look at my own, biased history, I have spent essentially at least a decade of living in downtown Vancouver, driving all over downtown Vancouver, going to industry parks when I was also at a bank like you, Josh. We used to go industry parks and knock on doors of businesses, randomly stop by and see if they need a business loan. And when I think about those experiences, they're very tangible and they really make you understand how the world functions outside of the tech industry. And I find that it is very, very important, I think, to have a bit of that experience. So can that experience be created in rural, remote communities? Absolutely, it can be. But the velocity of those small experiences will be much at a slower rate, right? So I think that, whatever you do with your career, whether you're in sales, CS, go-to-market, product engineering, there are certain professions that require you to be behind a computer at any given time, if you're especially in dev. But for all other professions, I think, in the day and age that we live in, having exposure to some sort of a metropolitan city or a city as big as Vancouver, which is not really a metropolitan, is, I think, crucial early in the career, because the benefits of that will be really important, I think, later in your career, because whatever problem that you are thrown, being able to empathize with the end user, the customer base, the ICP, it really comes from those experiences, the hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs that I have spoken back in the day, and essentially just looking at a business from outside, small retail shop, and just being able to gauge what their financial statements may be and the challenges that they may be going through is very different if you are just behind your screen, or if you're in a much rural area, especially in your right after college and school. So maybe I'll just leave it at that. But I think that developing a network and living in a larger city right after school or during school, I think, is a very important step to take before considering a remote community.
That's kind of an interesting perspective that I never really thought of, the experiences you get from living in a larger city. My take is, I think when I built my career, it would have been really hard to be where I am today if I didn't make that move to Vancouver. and land with the company that I did. Just the opportunities at the time in Victoria were really limited. I think there's more now, but 15 years ago, there wasn't a lot in the tech software space in Victoria. However, I think it's really changed now. Like the amount of open positions that are being hired to work remote, I think the opportunities that are available to people today compared to 15 years ago to be able to build their career and get more kind of entry-level jobs, or call it early career jobs, whether it be in product or marketing or especially engineering, I think is a little easier to hire anywhere. I think the opportunities open to people are just way more than they ever been before. And I sort of look at myself and where I am now with user testing, and I sort of wonder if when I made that transition from Galvanize sort of 15 years ago, if I made that transition, I was in Victoria, I'm not sure I would have been able to get the kind of opportunities that I had over the last couple of years. So I think the landscape has really changed over the last 2 years, and I think people should really take advantage of, if you're in a smaller community and remote work is something you like to do, I don't think it's for everyone. I think there's a ton of opportunity out there for you to get experience in all sorts of different ways.
I think one thing that, like John, I didn't even consider the whole like being able to empathize with customers and users in major urban settings if you haven't like lived that. But I think the other thing that maybe Josh you can incorporate when you answer is like, I know when the pandemic hit, the junior staff and the companies I worked for had a real hard time without the office osmosis where you're like learning literally by the in-between meeting 5-minute conversations and all those little things, which I think it does lead to a bit of extra velocity if you're in your first 10 years of your career. I find that I really need that today? Maybe I don't think so, but like in the first 10 years, you learn a lot in between meetings and in between sessions and all that kind of stuff. So I'll pass it to Josh for kind of your view on whether you be where you are today or whether you'd restart, in the Yukon.
Yeah. I guess my thought on this is a little more internal, because I do see both markets having different levels of opportunity. And I guess I really look at it through the lens of how challenges really cause growth. And, if I look at it when I was 19, 20 years old, I mean, I shared at the beginning, I thought I wanted to be an English teacher. I mean, we don't know what we want to do when we're young. So I think really we have to look at the beginning of our careers as, and really our careers in general as a journey. And the first, few years, that first commitment, dedication is really an apprenticeship on whatever path you're deciding to go down. So if you're dreaming about this big outcome of being the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and you're getting into, that corporate culture, and you're planting your seeds, making your manager look good, you're going through all the right motions. Yeah, maybe 20 years, you'll be there. I guess when I look at it from the difference of small city, big city, it really comes down now to frequency of interactions. And there's a lot of challenges that we face on a day-to-day as being entrepreneurs, but I also reflect back to my experiences in Japan. It was very easy for me to eventually get a job. It took me 3 months. It wasn't an easy 3 months. I almost went homeless and came back to Canada because I was in this like weird period of, 19 to 20 years old, didn't have a university degree, who wanted to hire me. And I remember I would be waking up at 5 a.m. out in front of the subways, handing out flyers so I could make, if I was lucky, $10, $20 equivalent that day to go and buy meals while I was grinding and trying to figure out, how do I get this job? If other people can do it, I can do it. And so I found the benefits of being in a big city, or the benefits of being in a geographic location where you have a frequency of lots of difficult interactions. Those are the best for growth. Those are the best for you to be spending your time on. When we're younger, we have more resilience physically and mentally. And I think we have to make the most of that, elasticity that we have. And then whatever comes out of those interactions, however we grow from that, I think that really aligns us to where do we go next on our career. And, for me, when I was in banking, I did think that I wanted to, move up. I wanted to be a senior vice president. I'm like, oh yeah, I want to make, $200,000 a year. That's what I set my goal on. I was very outcome, money focused on things versus really reflecting back on the knowledge opportunity that I have in front of me from these just everyday interactions within my job and my career. And so I had a really big mindset shift since becoming an entrepreneur and really growing out of the mentality I had as a people leader, as a banker, and then now becoming somebody who's a coach and working with small businesses every day through their challenges. So it's interesting. I think there's value in both. The thing I really love about small rural remote communities is you can pinpoint those moments, those frequencies of challenges. I'd say maybe it's not as easy, but the accessibility of the layers to get there are it's a little shorter. And it sounds weird because you don't have as many interactions like me handing out flyers to people on a train station. But what I mean by that is rural remote communities, their pain is, I guess, if you were to measure their pain, usually it's the pain point's a little bit larger. There's not a lot of people focusing on these communities. And so when you go into a rural remote community with a solution, with an idea, with even just an energy to focus on a problem, people buy in. It's very similar to that MVP lean startup methodology. We see that, happening all the time in remote rural Canada. People want help. So they're, I guess, more trusting or more maybe accepting of whatever you're bringing to the table for their problem as a result. So we can really pinpoint our growth and the frequency in which we're having these difficult interactions. It'll maybe not as frequent, but we can pinpoint them and we can get into these interactions for our growth from these rural and remote communities, especially from somewhere where, like the Yukon, because we have such a small population, 45,000 people. Whitehorse is 32,000 of that. I live in a community that's about a 55-kilometer drive south. We have about 650 here. I mean, it's really easy to get yourself out there if you want to get out there. Because again, there's not a lot of competition. There's not a lot of people competing for the same types of jobs that maybe, I'm looking at, or the same type of work that I'm looking at. So there's pros and cons of both. I think big city really allows you to fast track and get more interactions, get more volume, get more experience faster. And there's a lot of value in that. And I wouldn't discount that from what it's like being in a rural remote community. It's just different. And we can be a little, I believe, more targeted. But in saying that, a big city, you could be more targeted too. And probably if you just focused your energy, you'd still have, the same interactions, same frequencies. I think it just took me to slow down and have that pace change in my life and my work cadence to actually maybe see that more clearly. So.
Yeah, I love all the pros and cons and different perspective that everyone's bringing to the conversation. I'm going to kind of merge the two questions that came in through the chat. And if you guys are watching this live, you can chat in, and we'll try to bring that up. And it's available on LinkedIn and YouTube right now. So Rashmi and Aiden asked kind of two sides of the same coin. One is asking, I'm in a big city, how do I be seen? The other one's asking, how do I keep networking when I'm in the small town? So I think they're kind of that is the polarity of what we're talking about today. In one space, you're seen, but you don't have the opportunities. In the other space, it's hard to be seen. So I'll kind of throw it out there, and whoever wants to jump in first can start a conversation up.
Sure, maybe I'll start. Or Kim, did you want to go ahead? Okay, great. Yeah, so I think the first question is from Rashmi. Being seen in a big city, I mean, absolutely. Like, there are hundreds of people, there are so many events. Like in Vancouver, if you look at the VTJ hosted events, I mean, the scene is really vibrant right now. But ultimately, there is optionality, right? And picking and selecting which events that you want to attend, with what subject, with which audience that may be there, whether it's product, whether it's go-to-market, whether it's a couple of law firms coming in and talking about setting up an IP, at an early stage for a company. It really is a very abundant in a big city. And making yourself visible, I mean, it just comes with, I think, consistency and having meaningful connections with people and following up with those people after networking events, right? Because you have a lot of small conversations at these events, and you grow your Rolodex, what we used to do back in the day, grab all of those business cards and then bring it home and start adding people on LinkedIn one by one. But I think nobody even have business cards anymore. You just add, what I do when I go to these events, I just add the person on the spot with a LinkedIn QR code scan, And I also take a screenshot of the person that I'm adding so that I don't forget to connect with them later if we had a connection on a particular subject together. But really, I think it's being consistent with the theme of events, and then not like, there are a lot of events out there that I find that it's essentially events for consultants, and nothing against consultants, but like there are certain events that are just for kind of sale purposes, where there are very specific subject events that I think increases the likelihood of having a very fruitful conversation about AI applications for database infrastructure or something like that. And I think picking and selecting and following up with the people you meet after the events is a way to build a great network of influencers, is what I would recommend. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a couple other things you can do to just sort of build on that idea. Definitely when you attend those events, you don't want to be a passenger. Like, make sure you're actually going around, talking to people, trying to drive some interesting conversation. Then as well, I think if you want to build your brand whether you're in a bigger or smaller city, building things like a blog where you're sharing some perspective, or maybe some sort of side project and sharing some ideas around that. And then as someone who hires a lot of people, I'll say my biggest gripe is just that I think a lot of people, I review hundreds of resumes, and my biggest gripe right now is that people don't spend much time on their resume. And I actually think your resume is the first piece of work that someone's going to review before they make a decision to shortlist whether they want to, spend some time to talk to you. So think of it as a piece of work that you're handing in, and put some thoughts and time into it. And I think if you do, you can sort of stand out amongst the crowd, especially right now. I think it's Rashmi who said it. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of talent on the market, just due to the state of the tech industry. And I think every little thing you can do to stand out a little bit more can really sort of help you. I'm not someone who really looks for someone who has the most experience. I want to find someone who I think is going to produce really high quality work.
I guess what I can add, I think, where we spend our time matters. And so, just going back to how we build even just meaningful connections, just to make sure that we're not doing it for the sake of doing it, that we really are trying to connect with peoples or organizations that share our values, because you're never going to get to where you want to go if you're just trying to force yourself down a path that doesn't matter, where there's no meaning. And sorry, it sounds very like philosophical for me to say that, but the practical applications are there, because if I'm concerned about entrepreneurship, there are many organizations within Whitehorse and across Canada that are focused on entrepreneurship. But the difference may be some are focused on sharing maybe theoretical knowledge and providing workshops and, running these sessions so people can at least get awareness. And then there's some that are focused on practical knowledge, some that are focused on connecting the dots. For me, I want to work with those that are focused on outcome, practical knowledge, programs. That's what I love, because I want to see people succeed. That's one of my values. Keep things simple, help people, help them succeed, help them accomplish their goals, because it just has ripple effects. So when we approach networking, I think you need to approach it the same way, whether you're in a small city or a big city. You got to find these reference points, these people that have the same values as you. What are they doing? How are they spending their time? I mean, it's this is the law of attraction. Like attracts like. You get it yourself into that kind of mindset, and you move yourself in that direction, and that path will open things up for you. When I was first getting into small communities, especially in banking, a lot of the messaging coaching I was getting from my manager at the time was like, connect with centers of influence, connect with these people who we see stand out within our communities. And at first I'm like, what the heck is a center of influence? Like, how do I define these people? It became very clear that these are the ones that, maybe they were the most consistent in appearance in the places where I was going. So whether I was a member of Rotary Club or I was doing something with elections in Kitimat, the people who were consistent at showing up were the ones that became those that were there, that those were that we drove, and those that were top of mind when an opportunity came up. So consistency is key, and you have to be authentic and really make sure that you're spending your time with organizations and people that reflect or have parallels to your values.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
I'm just
okay.
going to top up on kind of Josh's authentic piece. Is like, if someone asked, you know, who is Rashmi, and you could say Rashmi is X, Y, Z. If someone knows exactly who you are and kind of your style, your tagline, all that kind of stuff, it really helps them remember what you are. Like I was at a product camp Vancouver on the weekend. So many people came up to mention this show that we're doing today, because that's kind of the shtick I've been doing for the last 12 months. And so to be visible is one thing. To be memorable is even better. And you're only memorable when you really understand what you're doing, who you're doing it for, and all that kind of stuff that Josh mentioned. So yeah, I'll make sure we transition kind of to Aiden's, and I'll finish by like kind of transitioning the conversation. How do you guys keep building connections while living in a smaller community? So as I mentioned, I was at product camp on Saturday, and I have met people for the last year, and not in person, virtually. And it's always interesting when you meet someone in person. You're like, oh, you're taller, you're shorter, you're totally different than kind of. But that was an exhausting day. But I was, meeting so many people and making sure the conversations were long enough that I actually built on my last conversation. And that is how I'm finding you have to be super intentional about your networking when you're living in a place where you're not going to just bump into someone at Urban Fair in downtown Vancouver and say, oh, hey, how's it going? And you have a light catch up. But that doesn't happen when you're in the cities that we're in. So I'm finding I have to be super intentional about it. And it's exhausting in short bursts, but I that's how I'm kind of trying to find the balance. But yeah, I'll put it out to the panel, and kind of you guys top out, how do you make it work living in a smaller city?
Yeah, if I were to add, one mistake I actually have done when I moved to here, as you know, when you're in product, Kevin, and Ryan, like it's you get so busy, right? Like you are essentially behind a computer screen, you have your Slack going on, and I mean, the reason that you move to a remote community is to be close with nature, most likely, or to have more space. I mean, most people that I speak with, it's one or the other or combination. It's a perfect. There are more ideal places for raising a family, and what ends up happening is, as soon as you walk away from your work, you are done with the work, right? Where in the city, if you are leaving your office on the way home, you may stumble upon a couple of people that you know, and you may go into a networking event just for 30 minutes, not to stay very long, but then just continue home. Where what I have done as a mistake here is, I was so busy that I kind of stopped nurturing my network. And I was still connecting with people here and there just to see how they are doing, people I have worked with before, people that became friends after. But I think one thing to mention, that's something to never let go, because ultimately, your role at a company or the company may change, and then you are here suddenly living in a remote community, and your network is stale, and now you feel like you're starting from all over again. And it's something that I would highly recommend making an effort while being employed, which whatever company you may be in. You may be in a completely different capacity, but essentially the acquaintances that become friends and your network after, it's something that needs to be nurtured. You cannot just leave it and then come back to it after 3-4 years later and be like, hey, how have you been? Like it's a like some of these people may still be okay with connecting with you, but it's a lot harder to kickstart those conversations. And I think making an effort and staying consistent, doesn't matter how busy your job or life may be, is one of the key aspects of living in a remote community. Because if you don't do it, as life changes, you may find yourself again, oh, do I have to move back to the city? I'm not able to find any of these remote work opportunities because it's highly competitive. And as we know, really most job applications now are happening through referrals. Like it's very, very, very rare for companies to pick a resume in a pool of 3,000 applicants for one product management role. And I mean, you may still get that, but the probabilities of that happening is very slim. So that's one thing that I'd like to point out.
You've inspired me, John, because I'm probably guilty for letting my network get a little bit stale since I've moved to Victoria. But I'll just build on what Ryan was saying about being intentional. I have sort of had these really interesting run-ins with different people who are adjacent to my network. And I have been a little bit more intentional about following up with them than I have in the past. Just living in Vancouver, there's so much networking opportunity. And I was a little bit younger, and so I was a lot more sort of keen to take advantage of those. So I think, like I ran into a friend of a friend, and ended up being, he ended up being someone who worked at a software company as a UX researcher, and a company that sort of a brand that I really like. And so I was just really intentional about reaching out to him afterwards, even though he was a friend of a friend. We sort of talk shop a little bit. And so I think if you're in a smaller town, I think you just need to, there's going to be less opportunity. And so I think just being more intentional and grabbing those opportunities maybe with a little bit more intention is a good idea.
I guess what I can add on the also on the network thing, because it's really tough to keep your network engaged, to be consistent with it. It's not even a priority for me right now. There's so many things that are on in my purview for priorities. But when I look at my network historically from any of my careers leading to where I am now, I do find that majority of people just in general they have a willingness to help. So it could be as a result of how I left things, from when we last connected, the memory of who I am at that time when we built those relationships. But it's been very affirming, and I would say helpful in a sense, where now I'm able to connect with these professionals. They're 10, 15 years, 20 years out of university, and now we're able to move things forward together, work on projects together, and they open up their network as a result of me being able to refer business to their entity and things like that. So it's very interesting to see how those networks play out. And when we're in a small, rural, remote community, opportunities are limited physically for who we can connect with. And especially going back to like if we're in something that's very niche and novel, we have a desire to go down a path that's very niche and novel, really making the most out of virtual events is a big thing. So, for me to connect with Ryan today, it actually came in directly from my involvement in Techstars. As an example, I was mentoring back in 2020. I had a connection from university that connected me to a mutual connection of Ryan's, and that's how it all happened. And we have 3 degrees of connection on how we got here today, but it was because I decided to volunteer my time for Techstars and help out with some mentorship stuff that was happening. So you have to really make the most of the opportunities that are in front of you. Try to keep things value aligned so it stays natural and intrinsic. And I think just the good comes. It just follows from that.
All right, so I'm going to transition us to LinkedIn and location. So my personal experience resonates a lot with a comment John made, where I was made redundant when a company did restructuring last year, and I was like, oh my god, I'm in a remote community. There are jobs in Victoria, but not the same volume as when I was in Vancouver. And then the world is going more hybrid, and then I realized people don't list Victoria sometimes as their location. So we're going to have this kind of little location, and I know. One of the comments was someone that lives up Vancouver Island. It's probably that person can't find any people on LinkedIn in their city because nobody's listing that city on LinkedIn. It is this kind of like thing where we are not listing where we actually live because it's recruiters think you can't do the job from there. So we're going to have that kind of conversation now. And so I think transparently, I think mine's set to Canada generic right now, but I am in Victoria.
Mine is, go ahead.
I should say mine's set to Whitehorse, Yukon, for very good reason. There's a lot of programs. There's a lot of organizations that want to engage with the territory. So for me to put Whitehorse, Yukon on my LinkedIn profile is an advantage. And I've always used my location regardless, even when I was an employee. I just want to make sure that I'm being genuine of who I am and where I'm at, and I'm open to relocation. Or at least I was at those times. So I make sure that's also clear in putting things forward if it's not a virtual job.
Yeah, mine is at the Greater Vancouver, British Columbia, because I mean, really, Greater Vancouver area goes all the way to Fraser Valley, and I do go into town 2 times a week, 3 times a week at times. So I find that it's just an extension of the city, even though you have to take a ferry, and everyone thinks Sunshine Coast is an island, but it's really a peninsula. So if I were to put Roberts Creek or Gibson's, I could probably connect with some people, but we already have a Slack community for all of the tech workers on the coast here, actually, which is something that we should also mention, leveraging Slack communities for Vancouver Tech Journal or Product BC has one. I think those are another way of staying connected while making sure your LinkedIn reflects close to where you are, perhaps.
I never really considered that Victoria having that on my LinkedIn profile might hinder me in my opportunities. Do you think Victoria is close enough I can do Greater Vancouver as well?
Well, at least right now, I'm finding that the whole hybrid thing for the fangs and whatnot, it actually is a factor. And like when you get into that conversation, but I mean, it's kind of a challenge because on the other hand, it's like, do you want to go in twice a week to Greater Vancouver into an office? It's like, no. So it's like, do I actually want to be getting those inquiries? Probably not. So it's a debate that I've been playing in my head for the last 12 months. And I know a lot of people that are from the island. We've had these conversations over pints.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. And also, I just wanted to add on it, when we're hiring remote, we tend to put Vancouver and Toronto remote. And then I kind of just wanted to point out for anyone who's watching and job hunting, if you see that, usually we're just putting that because that's a center, but we totally consider people who are kind of anywhere around those areas or even in Calgary or whatever. I think a lot of the job sites force you to put a city, even if it's remote. So I think if you see remote Vancouver and looking at remote job, I think you can be anywhere in BC and still apply for those jobs and be considered. Probably hybrid is a bit of a different story, but I thought I would add that on in case people get confused when they see Vancouver remote.
So we'll now kind of hit our last topic before kind of the wrap up, which is employee versus consultant entrepreneurs. So a lot of the folks that I was chatting to pull this panel together were entrepreneurs or they were consultants similar to Josh. So Kevin works for a company. Josh does his own thing, and so I wanted to provide a bit of, but I feel like a lot of people that are in smaller communities think entrepreneurially, regardless of which bucket they fall into, because you have to think, how do I build that network? How do I maintain that network? There's nothing that happens by accident when you're in a small community building a remote role. So I wanted to kind of preface that, but that now I'll throw it out to kind of how you guys balance this kind of entrepreneur and Kevin, even as the employee of the group, you did your own startup for a little while being remotely. So I think you fall under that entrepreneur mindset bucket for sure. So do you guys have any comments on how this kind of being remote changes the kind of calculus between these factors?
Yeah, I can start. I think one of the big differences is how we measure or anticipate outcomes. From an employee mindset, and especially when I was a people manager, it was about hours. It was about specific numbers that we're accomplishing in those hours. The KPIs were very real, and I was managing towards those. And as an entrepreneur, one of the things I've noticed, not that the KPIs have gone away, they've just changed, and it's definitely become more outcomes focused than time focused. As I spend my time, as I look at how I work remotely or virtually, even with my team. I have a partner in Burnaby. We have employees in Toronto, Ottawa, team members in the Central Interior, like all over. And when we really look at how we work together, it's about outcomes. So it's not going to work for everyone because it's, some companies, we're paying an hourly rate. They expect hourly outputs. So it's tough, but I do think that there's a healthy transition in looking at what we can accomplish versus how long we spend accomplishing something.
And John, as the one that's relocated most recently, has kind of living in Roberts Creek changed your mindset that maybe you're thinking more entrepreneurial after relocating?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely entrepreneurial, not only within the tech ecosystem, but also looking at some of the traditional businesses here and seeing opportunities. Like, as more people are moving to the coast, as the average age of a resident here is getting reduced, because I believe it's around 58, if I'm not mistaken, for this community, a lot of retirees. At the same time, you have a lot of younger families are coming in. I mean, it is almost impossible not to see that, oh, this business does not exist here. What could it mean if there was enough of a demand? What is the TAM for something like this along the coast among 30,000 people? You start thinking about some of these traditional business opportunities, and we do have actually great examples of it. One of the breweries, Tapworks here, I believe the founder is coming from tech, Nucleus Networks, if I'm not mistaken, and the Beachcomber Coffee is again the same idea. So you do have a lot more opportunities, and absolutely, you do start looking at the world a little bit differently and entrepreneurial as you live in these communities, because you have more essentially time to reflect and then really get in touch and connect with what is it that you want in life, and what is that formula that brings not only work-life balance, joy, abundance in terms of financial compensation, but it's really not going to only come from chasing a title and a career in one job. And that really starts becoming a real thought, which personally I'm going through at the moment. So
Yeah, I have noticed that a lot of my ex-colleagues in my network have started to transition to more consultancy or contract work. So it definitely seems, I don't know if it's a bit of a trend in my network, but I've seen a lot more of that. For myself, one of the things I learned from my startup journey is I think the thing I'm really passionate about and I really love to do is to build product teams. And I think like that's where I really wanted to transition back to being an employee, because I missed that. And so I think it's really personal as well. Like, what's the thing that really motivates and drives you and sort of has you fall in love with your work every day? And so I think figuring out what's the best fit for you at this time, whether it's being an employee and sort of growing your career, or starting your own startup, or maybe taking some of your past experiences and sharing that through some consultancy or contract work with someone who values that skill set.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I'm going to pull together a point from Josh and a point from John from earlier in the episode about the whole brewery and degrees of connection. And when I was in Vancouver, the Donnelly Group was this major pub and restaurant chain. I had no clue who was the guy that was actually running the show or the family that was running that. I mean, you could look them up in the newspaper, but there's no way I could get in contact with that person. But I bet, John, if you wanted to find out who the owner was of that Tapworks or the coffee shop, it's one or two asks, and that owner will probably come out from the back room. And that's something that's different in the smaller community. You can really understand these businesses that are not large franchise operations, and you can get in touch with these people so easily, and that's a huge advantage, I feel like, if you're trying to explore a different career, which just doesn't exist in the urban setting. So with that, we're going to kind of transition to our lightning round wrap up. So before the episode, I was talking about how I've read so much about remote work, but nothing about the remote work career. And so we're going to try to bring up some final tips and kind of resources from the panel that people at home can kind of dive into further. So with that said, we'll kind of start off with Josh and then work our way around.
Okay. Yeah, I would say if you're exploring a career change, or you're thinking about maybe starting your own venture, and you are stuck in that ultimatum of big city, small city, again, go reflect on who you are first. There's a lot of great resources out there to help you, find yourself, and various different methodologies to do that. But I definitely say don't discount that side of who you are. A real, I think, logical one that I found that worked for me was Robert Greene. He has a lot of great books, but he has this one that's called 365 Days, it's like daily laws. And so every day is a meditation that you go through, and it kind of leads you through your daily journey. So it's this yearly activity of, finding yourself and self-reflection, and really trying to help you get yourself on the path you want to go on. So that would be one resource I could share. I think from the Yukon, if I can put a plug in for resources and, why the Yukon. One, I just want to say, if you're thinking about a career as an employee, the Yukon has a very high household income per capita. It's because 60% of our population works for government. So if you're looking for comfortable economic life, perhaps there is opportunity. The government is always hiring. With that brings its own challenges, but a lot of benefits that come from it, because we have a very wealthy local population. So as an entrepreneur, especially for consumer goods or services, and if you're focused on the local market, there's a fair amount of market share to obtain from that. So there's a lot of market opportunity there. There's not a lot of competition in the Yukon. So I just want to put that out there. So if you have a great idea, why not come up here and see if somebody actually is, likes your solution for their problem. I do think that there's a lot of acceptance and willingness to try things out. We have a really great ecosystem up here for supporting businesses. On the tech side, we have Tech Yukon. They've helped me in my own ventures. I have a agriculture technology startup where we do plant tissue culture work, and we've done some machine learning AI work. And I'm not a technical founder. They've been able to help me, connect the dots with industry experts, provide some funding. We have Uconstruct up here, which is essentially a co-working space that provides a lot of boot camps, workshops, maybe more from a theoretical lens. And then even Yukon University has an innovation entrepreneurship department, which I work closely with, and we run their business incubator with them. And so there's a lot of support. There's a lot of appetite to see people succeed. Of course, it's not without its challenges. We are rural and remote. Housing, similar to a big city, is expensive up here, and we have a housing shortage. So we do have our own issues as far as, finding that comfortable, safe place to be. But once you're settled, once you're established, the wildlife up here, the solitude, the ease of connection to major hubs because of the infrastructure we have in place as far as airfare is fantastic. And if you're for those of you that care about internet, we do have fiber optic internet in Whitehorse, and even in my community here in Marsh Lake. Not everywhere in the Yukon has it, but there's quite a hefty investment going into fiber infrastructure across the territory. So even our remote rural communities throughout the Yukon will be able to connect just like the rest of us. So I just want to throw those plugs out there. Robert Greene as a resource. And then the other two resources I'd recommend just quickly, Lean Startup Methodology by Eric Ries. I mean, being able to really simplify a business idea or anything that we approach in life. I mean, just a lot of great recipes in there. And actually, I'll leave it at that. Those are my two, the Robert Greene and then also the Eric Ries book. Okay.
I love the sort of talk that Josh was talking about trying to find something that aligns with your values. And I guess maybe not a resource, but a tip. Don't be afraid if you really want to find some work that aligns and a company that aligns with your values. Don't be afraid about taking a risk and even maybe taking a step back in your career. When I moved, and I'm sure this can happen when you move from a big city to a small city, but when I moved from Victoria to Vancouver, I already had my first product role. So I had these big dreams of moving to Vancouver, getting my next product role, and growing my career. I found that actually really challenging at the time, but I ended up finding a company that I was really passionate about their product and what they were trying to do. And I ended up taking a role in tech support, which I felt like was kind of a big step back for me. But then I grew within that company all the way to leading the product team. And so I just wanted to say, don't be afraid to, if you're not happy where you are, sometimes you got to take a step back to find the place that'll make you really happy and potentially find the place where you can really grow your career.
Great advice. If I were to add to that, is essentially working your network through LinkedIn and being vocal about your journey to a point that may be comfortable for you. I mean, the way I got connected with Ryan made a LinkedIn post, and one of our mutual contacts, Rob Foxall, who's a great networker and communicator, threw a bunch of our names on there, and then that's how we connected. And I have another example of this where William, who used to be with Vancouver Tech Journal, he's with Startup TNT now, great fella. And he made a post about, hey, who lives on the Sunshine Coast? We have few people that are moving there, just want to throw up your names on there, start a Google spreadsheet. And lo and behold, you had about, 30, 40 people that put their names on there in this small community, right? And just being vocal about it, and people will just chime in. And if they know anybody, they will. And you start compiling lists, and those lists become meetups, and the meetups become meaningful connections, and it kind of grows from there. So, and leveraging Slack as a final item, I think, is something that that definitely there are a lot of nonprofit Slack groups that allow people to introduce themselves and get connected. So.
Yeah, well said. And I'm going to pull something from a past episode when I interviewed people about making the transition to entrepreneurship, and it's validation. And I know when I moved to Victoria, I validated by meeting a friend of mine a couple times before actually making the full move. And Josh mentioned that he validated the Yukon by through friends. And so I think that through all the resources that have been mentioned today, you can probably find your people, your community in the town or place that you want to move, and try to validate that before you move. And I think it makes the transition so much smoother. So as we wrap up, I'd like to thank Josh, John, and Kevin. I'm going to briefly put up some of their QR codes. So if you're looking to connect with John, that's his information there. Kevin and Josh. And then as we wrap up, this information will be on YouTube after today. So you can subscribe to the channel on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and Apple Music. Some of the later ones that are audio only, I'm a bit behind on kind of some of my updates, but that's where you can find more of this information. And the end of episode preview. So if you're really interested in working for an agency, the next episode I have on May 2nd, we'll be diving into how to build a career at an agency. So creative development agencies have got a mixed panel there. So stay tuned for that one. And with that said, thanks guys for attending. All right.